Welcome to Benefits Redefined, a series of conversations focused on rewriting the employer playbook. If you're an employer today, you're being pulled in a dozen directions at once. Rising healthcare costs, increasingly complex care decisions, growing employee expectations, and constant innovation. Too often, those forces are treated separately. Costs live in one conversation, care in another, culture somewhere else entirely. This podcast exists because those things don't actually operate in silos. I'm Richard Silberstein, and I work with a group of colleagues across the country who spend our time helping employers move beyond transactional benefits and towards strategies that actually work in the real world. Each episode features practitioners who are in the work every day, not theorists, not sales pitches, but people helping employers navigate what's next in employee benefits, healthcare risk, and enterprise strategy. Today's Benefit Redefined episode is PBM transparency, GLP-1s, and what fiduciary employers should be doing before their next renewal. In our last episode of Benefits Redefined, we spoke with employee benefits attorney Stacey Barrow about the growing legal scrutiny around healthcare benefits, including broker lawsuits and fiduciary responsibilities employers have under ERISA. One of the biggest areas where the fiduciary oversight is being increasingly important is in pharmacy benefits. Between recent PBM transparency legislation, rising specialty cost, and rapid growth of GLP-1 medications, pharmacy spend is becoming one of the largest and most complex financial risks in an employer health plan. For self-funded employers, this raises an important question. Are we managing pharmacy benefits with the same level of governance and oversight that we apply to other major financial risks in the business? Today, I'm joined by Kevin Gregory from Alaris Pharmacy Consulting Team to talk about what's happening in the PBM market, how pharmacy benefit managers are responding to new transparency requirements, and what fiduciary employers should be thinking about as they prepare for their next renewal. Kevin, thanks for being here today and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Richard.
So for those that don't know Kevin Gregory and Alaris Pharmacy, you want to give just a little background about yourself and Alaris Pharmacy?
Yeah, so myself, I've been in the pharmacy industry. Really, I broke into it in my first job ever and went to work for a broker back in the early 1990s. That's when rebates were like $1 per script. So it was kind of very funny. So I've been around the pharmacy benefits for a long time. So I joined the Alaris team a little over a year ago. I've managed very large group purchasing coalitions in the pharmacy world as well as the medical world. So my background is steeped in putting pharmacy and medical together, not just individually looking at pharmacy through a silo.
You and the team do a great job, and I look forward to the conversation today since it's such a hot topic. So let's kick off some discussions about PBM transparency legislation. There's been a lot of discussion recently about PBM transparency legislation and increased scrutiny of how pharmacy benefit managers are managed. From your perspective, what has changed in the marketplace, and why is this beginning to be such a big topic for employers today?
It's a political year, so I expected pharmacy to be at the top, and I'm not much of a political guy. I've done some work for politicians and done some lobbying, but it's just not in my DNA to do that. But I felt like, given where things were at, I felt PBM is one of those issues that gets a lot of people's attention and impacts consumers very well. So I expected it to be a major issue, but it turned out, it basically got cleared off the deck pretty quickly last month when the CAA 26, which I'm sure they'll come up with a cute name for whatever it is, PBM transparency was passed. The DOL language, I'm quite sure Stacey talked about this, but the DOL and how they're going to enforce it and the laws seem to be pretty much stacked on top of each other right now. As I think about the transparency and what's going on, by January 1st, 2029, everything's going to have to be transparent, from your pricing to the rebate payments to what we get paid as an organization and any money that used to be out there. So there's going to be some differences that a lot of folks are going to feel around that.
And so let's unpack some of the terms on that. So when you think about transparency, for those that are listening and that might not be as in the weeds on some of this or expert, what needs to be more transparent or what wasn't transparent before that they're going to see a change?
Yeah, so with a lot of I'll call them the big three. So that's CVS, ESI, and Optum are the big three PBMs. The model was like this. You would work for an employer, you would get your ID card, you would go to the local pharmacy, they would charge you, and then what The PBM charge the plan sponsor was something different. So they made a spread on that price differential. That's not transparent. That's a traditional contract. Along with that comes very low admin fees from the PBM, but not no admin fees. So that was kind of funny over the past few years. More and more admin fees keep popping up. So that was really the traditional model. And then the transparent model basically says if I go to the pharmacy and my drug costs $2, the plan sponsors bill $2 plus the admin fee that goes along with that. So that's keep it really simple, the difference between transparency and, traditional pricing models.
It's funny, I've seen on LinkedIn and all over the media, you have somebody do a post of what the flow of the money is in the pharmacy, the PBM, and all along the way, everybody's getting a little piece here, getting a piece there, and they don't, realize, all the hidden amounts of money. It's been interesting seeing some of the record earnings from all the pharmacy companies, from that standpoint.
For sure.
Also, I know we hadn't talked about this before, but it feels as though there are other external, I don't say external forces, but I'm seeing Mark Cuban post a lot. I'm hearing Mark Cuban post a lot. You have Trump RX. So what are you feeling is different in the environment, not just in DC? Like when you think about that?
The direct-to-consumer model in one way or another has been out there. So, as a consumer, we've all gone to the pharmacy. We've said, hey, I'm here to pick up my prescription. And then the very nice person behind the counter says, hey, Kevin, I can get this for you less expensively than on your insurance plan if you'll use this card. And so most people say, sure, I'd love to do that. Who doesn't want to pay less for something, especially when it's just a commodity like a prescription drug? So we all take that. That's a direct-to-consumer model. That's not being filed on my insurance, and I'm just paying a lower cost. So I trade that off. So the direct-to-consumer model that Trump RX, and even as you see the GLP-1 for weight loss manufacturers go to, there's a trade-off, right? So I can get it at a lower cost, but there's no governance. So there's no rules that a plan sponsor or a PBM. A lot of times we like to pick on PBMs, but they do play a role in kind of governing, just like a medical carrier does, and saying, should you be allowed to have that spinal fusion surgery? Should you be allowed to have that GLP-1 without asking any questions? And so as a result of that, it drives up the price of that. And I was recently at a conference where Mark Cuban spoke. He says, you can get your medical care cheaper if you just ask. But as my wife likes to tell me, the only people who care about insurance are me and my friends. So that's her way of telling me when we're out at parties that, people don't want to talk about insurance anymore. They want to talk about the sports or the weather. But I'm like, they asked me, so I tell them. So that's how fun I am at cocktail parties, Richard.
So when you think about increased transparency, does it mean lower cost? Are there trade-offs employers need to understand? Because some people, especially when they got hospital transparency, thought costs are going to go down, we're going to save a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it was interesting to hear that a lot of the insurance companies and the PBMs weren't reporting like a decrease in earnings in 26 and 27 with everything going on.
It's an interesting phenomenon, and it'll be very easy to see next year because the GLP-1 manufacturers have announced that they're going to be reducing the list price of their drugs on January 1st of 2026. That reduction is also going to result in a reduction in rebate payments because what the manufacturers do is they raise the price of the drug and then they pay it back if, like buying a TV, right? I buy a TV, I fill out my rebate form, it comes to me 9 months later, so long as I've met all the requirements that the TV manufacturer gave me. Same thing happens with drugs. If you want that rebate back, you have to meet all the manufacturer requirements, and then they'll give you your money back. So that's why the PBM's doing that. So you'll see a reduction in list price. The rebate reductions are also going to come down. And I would like it to be dollar for dollar, but I don't think it's going to be, kind of between the list price coming down and then rebate values going away. So we'll see that pretty quickly. But in the transparent world, and especially as rebates are going to have to be paid out, and we're going to wait for the final DOL rules on that, I would see rebates reducing. And we've been consulting on this for a while now, is plan sponsors should really be thinking about their rebate payments reducing. just in general. There's a lot of pressure. And from a cash flow standpoint, you'd rather pay less today rather than wait 90 to 180 days to get your money back. So that's an advantage for plan sponsors from a cash flow standpoint.
You mentioned the word GLP-1, which is a hot topic. So when you think about GLP-1 medications like Wegovy and Ozempic, as we know, there's a lot of discussion in the employer marketplace about that. As you're working with employers in the pharmacy strategy, what are you seeing in terms of utilization and cost, and what are employers doing? Are they covering them, not covering them, and what should they be thinking about as they think about all these other changes we're discussing?
So it is one of the most interesting topics that's out there. And at first, there was a lot of people covering them, and then the costs were too much. So they started taking them out. And it's painful, right? When you give something to your folks on your plan and then you take it away, it hurts, right? So that's definitely disruption when we talk about making a change. More plan sponsors have really not been covering them, but it doesn't mean that they're not getting covered. So there's doctors and patients have become really good at massaging the system to get what they want. And so as a result, there's a lot of people who are getting weight loss drugs, GLP-1s, and because GLP-1s are very effective. I mean, when I mean very effective at treating diabetes. And it's very helpful for people who have had diabetes, where some of their other medications, the metformins of the world and all of that, it's just not working for them. GLP-1s are a valuable tool to our medical community in solving that problem. When it comes to weight loss, it's also very effective. But those people who are taking it, what we're seeing is an increased use of the emergency room and urgent care. So you're having those additional expenses that go along with that, because not everyone's system is ready for the side effects that come with that medication. So that come along with that. So a lot of plan sponsors have gone out of it. It doesn't mean that you're not, even if they're direct to consumer, they've made them available, really cost effective. And again, all you need is a prescription. There's no guidelines, there's no governance, there's nobody saying, hey, Kevin or Richard, let me ask you a few questions before you take that medication. I always like to say, if, that's about, currently running about $1,000 a month in math. And look, if I was going to spend $1,000 a month, I would be asking a couple questions.
And it's interesting. We're seeing employers that were paying more in weight loss drugs than they were collecting employee deductions, and they just can't, they can't manage that and absorb that. So if you were on a benefits committee as one of the committee members with your expertise, and it was a self-funded plan, and you're thinking about, whether to cover, not to cover, how to cover, and knowing what's going on in the marketplace, what would your vote be or your recommendation be to the rest of the committee members for, let's say, a 500-person company self-funded?
So a 500-person company self-funded, it might be more industry-based when you come to this answer, because certain industries you're competing for talent differently, and you would have to cover it. And you would make a way, and you would find a way to cover GLP-1s for weight loss at the lowest possible cost. That's what I would do in that industry. If I was in that middle tier where my margins were a little different, I was, say 5% or lower in total margins, I would really be looking to exclude them and essentially say, my auto insurance company doesn't pay for me to get my oil changed. I'm not going to pay for you to get your weight loss meds. If you want to go do your weight loss meds, I'm very happy for you. You should go buy them directly from the consumer, from the manufacturer. And by the way, currently those are less expensive, than if I pay for it on my plan. So as a fiduciary, it's smarter for me to all other plan participants who are not taking GLP-1s for weight loss to say, you can buy it less expensively off the plan, so go buy it over there.
And when you talk about industries, like what industries are you seeing that you said they need to cover in order to be competitive, or because their competitors are covering it from that standpoint?
Yeah, so you're seeing a lot of law firms are dealing with that. Medical practices, the hospitals have been changing a little bit more. And I would also say like tech organizations where they're really competing for talent. I mean, I had one of them call me and say, if I don't cover it, I'm having people come in for job interviews, and one of the first questions they're asking me is, do you cover GLP-1s for weight loss? in that situation, you have to. It also comes with a higher price tag for your overall benefits, and your business can support that. But some businesses just they cannot support it, and from a plan sponsor standpoint, they would do it. But if they were to ask me outside of the competitive landscape, should you be covering GLP-1s for weight loss on your plan? I would tell you no. I would tell you it's cheaper off the plan. They can get it less expensively going directly to the manufacturer. Let them make that decision and manage that on their own.
And then I know we've talked about it on our advanced health strategy calls, but there are some vendors out there that employers can partner with that help make it easier for their employees to access that if they pay on their own. So that's something we're seeing. Talk about the upcoming oral GLP-1s and what you're hearing and seeing. I know that I've heard they're less effective. Also, there's less adherence to a pill. So what do you think's coming down the pike?
So they're definitely coming down the pike. Some of it's going to be existing medications just rebranded from that are out there. We're human beings, Richard. So having somebody wake up first thing in the morning, take your pill, do this, do that, it's hard enough to get people to get up and do 25 push-ups, right? So asking them to take a pill every morning, the adherence factor of taking a pill on a regular basis, it's going to go down. So the overall effectiveness of a pill, unfortunately, will just not be as good. It'll be easier because a lot of people just won't take a shot. They're very uncomfortable, and especially if they have to give it to themselves or have a spouse or a family member give them a shot, it's very uncomfortable. But taking a pill is easy. And so as a result, I would anticipate you'll see a spike in, interest and utilization, and then kind of drop off if plans are covering it. The math so far broadly on GLP-1s with shots is if you start taking it for weight loss, after about 4 months, about 50% of those people drop off. And then 3 months later, about 50% of that 50%, so 25% in total of that original 100, go back on it. So you're making a lot of investment in GLP-1 dollars for things that may not necessarily work, and that's another broad concern that I have about you lose the weight, you lose muscle with it if you look at the studies, and then when you gain that back, you're gaining back not muscle, you're gaining back fat. So you're trading healthy weight for less healthy weight if you don't stay on it.
We were at a meeting, I remember, with some of our colleagues, and there was somebody there that said that they covered it, but somebody had to meet with a certified strength coach that they provided to the employees. And so, again, I think it's one of those things where are there support systems in place to make sure people have the best impact possible? And then also, are you doing it for people that aren't going to be there long term? Right. So you're investing a lot of dollars up front. So, hey, as we think about your pharmacy team and how you're advising employers, what are the most common questions or projects that you're helping clients with right now as we shift away from the GLP-1 discussion and more onto the bigger picture?
Yes, I mean, a lot of where we're at right now is fiduciary. We've been big on fiduciary responsibility, making sure that you're doing the blocking and tackling of running a benefits plan. Are you doing an audit for your plan? If you haven't done an audit, I would tell you I recommend them every 2 years, but minimally you should do it every 3 years. You should audit your plan, audit your PBM, and make sure that they're doing their job. Blocking and tackling, looking at your PBM and saying, are they doing their job for us? That's the second thing. The next thing that we're starting to see more of, and this is even before the legislation, so I probably some of these, the BUCAs, carriers, is more carve-in analysis, where people they've been carved out, and now all of a sudden the contracts and the pricing of those carve-in offers are starting to look a little more attractive. So we're actually looking at that as a viable solution to make sure, so long as the transparency is there and the contract terms are there, I think it's a very viable option for a lot of employers, to ensure that they're getting the best possible deal, and making sure that the vendors are upholding to their obligation.
Yeah, we talked about Stacy about the fiduciary responsibility, and a lot of people might think that, hey, I've been with this vendor for a while, service is good, I think everything's good. And so I just don't have time, but especially on pharmacy, right? It seems that every time I see you all taking a look under the hood on somebody that's had a PBM relationship for 5, 6 years that hasn't reviewed it, you're finding huge savings. And then most PBM contracts renew, every 3 years? So shouldn't they really do a review when that happens, right?
Yeah. So you bring up an interesting point, and it goes back to, look, I broke into this business dealing with when 5,500 were a big issue. So I got used to spending time with lawyers, and my ERISA lawyer used to say, look, Kevin, your job is to make sure if your client gets hauled into court or they're getting deposed, that they can say yes, right? Because if they're not doing their basics, then if you'll never make it to the jury because they're going to settle. And so you want to be ahead of that and make sure you're doing it. It's not cool. It's not like the next hippest thing in the world, but just get it done and make sure you do it right. Contract reviews, and especially if you've been with a vendor a long time, it's not to say you're leaving them, but it's also time to make sure that you're treating an existing vendor as if they were brand new and making sure that they're delivering the value. We don't always hear their story, or they're telling us about a new program, or the account management team that we've been working with is, they've just gotten so comfortable that they think they know everything about you. And every once in a while, you got to sit down with your wife and say, hey, honey, what would you like? And how can I make you happier? It's what I do. And my wife's like, if you do all these things, I'll be happier. And I'm like, I'll go do them. Same thing happens with your vendors. I take that same approach when we're working with PBMs. It's not that you're looking to make a change. You're looking to make sure that you're getting the full value and your contract is up to date. Because there's a lot of new things. If you've got a contract that's been around even for 3 years now, I would tell you you've got to look at it, you've got to review it, and you should be updating it.
So one of the things that I'm hearing a lot more is, and we can unpack this a little bit, is there's carved in, there's carved out, but there's also pass-through contracts. So talk about what are you seeing people? There's the big three, but then are people also looking at, do I look at sort of these pass-through contracts as a fiduciary responsibility for my people and think about lowest net cost?
It's funny you say that. We literally just presented to a client before we went into finalist meetings, and they said, why are you recommending we bring this PBM in? Because on paper, they don't look super great. Their rebates aren't as great. Their discounts aren't as great. And I said, well, here's the funny thing. You're currently spending $100 per member per month, and they're going to guarantee next year it's going to be $85. So forget about all the discounts, forget about all the rebates that all these other people are promising you. They're going to reduce your cost by $15 per member per month. And they said, we're going to listen. And you may not buy from them, and I told them that. I said, you may not buy from them, but you need to understand that model and how they're doing it. Because I think even as we head into transparency in 2029, as the legislation starts to fully come through, the people who can manage care better and manage formularies better will win. Right now, there's going to be some advantages for those big three PBMs, ESI, CVS, and Optum, strictly because they've got more money that might have to go back to the plan sponsor, depending upon the final definition of the word rebate. So that would put an advantage to them. But we've seen a growth in that, pass-through model. And so there, you should look at it. Is it for everybody? I think a lot of people like them, but you got to get comfortable with it.
Yep. So talk about the timing. I think what people may not realize that really haven't reviewed their PBM, or they were with the carrier or the TPA PBM, and now they kind of want to do a deep dive. Is really now the time to be doing it for your 1/1 as opposed to when it's August and you're doing your review of your benefits? Talk about what's the optimum cycle for doing some of that project work.
Right. That's a great question. And I like to back up, if you're just using 1/1, since a lot of contracts are 1/1, you want minimally 90. I tell everybody, if you want to be happy as a plan sponsor, if you want to be happy as a broker advisor, get to 120 days. You want to start your implementation right around September 1st. Okay. And so however long it takes you to make a decision from September 1st, backwards is when you got to go. So a lot of times we're meeting, well, we've got a board meeting on August 15th or we've got a board meeting on September 5th. Can we match to that? You can manage to that and kind of deal with that, but it's understanding the decision-making time frame. But it takes for a good full RFP and to meet with the vendors and get comfortable with them. If you're thinking about making a change, you're going to be investing 120 days in front of that to answer your RFP questions, meet with them, make sure that we're all clear on expectations of, it's the one thing, and I'll divert a little bit on that. The one thing I try to tell our clients is don't make people guess what you want. If you tell them what you want and your expectations, they'll tell you if they can meet them or not. But, so be very clear on your expectations, and then you can make a decision a lot better because then they'll tell you if they can meet those or not. And then you can judge whether they can meet them or not.
So in the spirit of transparency, you all used, and we worked with you before you became Alera Pharmacy, but right. You all had a consulting fee that I always said more than paid for itself 10 times plus over. And in some cases, the winning PBM paid the fee. Mm-hmm. Now, today, in the spirit of transparency, right, that's changing. So just talk about the value of an Alera Pharmacy team and then how that works economically without getting into all the minutia. But for somebody just to understand that there is a cost for the consulting side, but it's more than offset usually by all the stewardship and the contract negotiation terms.
Right. So, the key thing, and I emphasize this, and I'm glad you brought that up, but the transparency world, we've always been transparent on our fees and what we do. And historically, we've always asked a PBM to pay that. They, in turn, build that into your pricing, okay? So, and it's important when I say that because there's a lot of contracts that I've looked at and read that have come in, and I said, well, there's an audit in here. Do you have a copy of your last audit report? And they said, well, we haven't done an audit in 3 years. I said, well, you're paying for it, so because it's in your pricing, and it gets a little frustrating. Look, the one thing I don't like in life is paying for something and then not using it. So and that's what happens on a lot of these PBM contracts. It gets built into pricing, and then it doesn't get done. So, you basically say, here's my price, here's what we're doing. We're a time and materials based organization. We basically say, here's our time, here's my hours, here's our hourly rate, here's what's going to go on, depending upon how much meeting time the client is looking for. That's going to dictate or how complex they want to be in the analysis. That's what dictates the price. And then we separate out. You've got an implementation. And so if you go through all the process and you decide to change, you don't have to pay for an implementation, right? So why should I charge you up front for that? So it's making sure as a plan sponsor, I'm an accountant. My boss always taught me to count every penny and make sure it balanced. So that was my first job. I had to reconcile 500 bank statements in 90 days, my first job. I got a bonus because I got them done on time before the auditors got there. So, but it was interesting. And so I think as you think through, kind of the value proposition for anybody, right? You need to say, what are you doing? How are you getting paid? And then go through each of those steps and make sure that you're getting the outcomes that you want. Reading through a PBM contract and getting the terms right is difficult. And it's important because, I like to describe a PBM contract as the single easiest mathematical equation of algebra, numerator to denominator. But then you got a 50+ page word problem to figure out what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator. And that's what takes the time. If you don't understand each of those things, you could be signing up for something or getting into something that's just not producing what you think it's going to produce.
So ironically, last night I got a 911 email and text from one of our colleagues, right? And I reviewed the attachment this morning, but very large employer carved in with a carrier, got a $140,000 check in the mail for a mistake that they made. but no communication, no proactivity. And what was interesting was, and getting in the weeds here, but I think there was a rebate at time of sale. And so employees were going to get the pharmacy and getting a lot lower copays. And then they fixed the problem, but now employees are paying a lot more. And so I said to the person calling me, I said, well, if they had had somebody like you all that read the contract, review the contract, monitor the contract, do quarterly reviews, that would have gotten caught. And that was from a contract that started in 2025 when they went from fully insured to self-funded. So I just tell people that if you don't have somebody watching that amount of spend and complexity, you're going to get what you're paying for, which is a lot of sometimes surprises, right?
Yeah, and I think there's an important difference in that. In the medical world, because of there's a significantly longer lag time on claims. I mean, I could go to the doctor on, March 13th, and that claim may not hit my carrier until April or May, just from a billing standpoint. In the pharmacy, if I go to the doctor today, I got a transaction this afternoon. And so you staying on top of that early and monitoring that, you're exactly right. I mean, things happen. People miscode. I mean, they fat finger things. I mean, AIs cannot take over everything, right? There's still going to be mistakes. And if you're not monitoring them and having discussions about that, it becomes a big problem. And then it can catch up to you. We had years ago, we ran an audit and they were not applying the copays correctly. So the PBM wanted to go back and charge a client $1 million for back copays. We said, that's your fault, not ours.
Right.
So, you can't blame us for your mistake. They ultimately agreed to eat it, but it was not fun. But if you didn't have somebody watching what was going on and then advocating for you, it could just be really easy to say, well, why do the client called me and said, why do I have another $1 million on my bill this month? I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. So let's, and they didn't tell me anything. Again, people will sneak things through if you let them. So you got to monitor everything.
Well, we're glad that we have you and the team to help our clients out. And for those that want to learn more about pharmacy transparency, GLP-1 strategies, and some of the Alera pharmacy consulting services, there'll be some information on the landing page after you listen to this podcast. So, Kevin, great seeing you, and I look forward to having you on in the future as we know there will be continued changes throughout the year, especially with the current administration.
I look forward to it as well, Richard. Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.